My DIL said, "You've disgusted me since the day I met you." I laughed and played a shocking video. Her face changed when she got served with the eviction notice. Have you ever lived in a house where people treated you like a burden? I have. I walked into the kitchen I once designed from scratch, and even my coffee mug had been replaced. Here's something they don't warn you about. Sometimes, the deepest wounds come from the people who share your last name. I used to think love meant staying quiet, enduring, making space. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it just means disappearing. One day, I stood at the bottom of the same staircase where my husband once kissed me goodbye before work, and I made a decision I never thought I'd have the courage to make. I left the very house I built. If you've ever felt like your love wasn't enough to be seen, this story is for you. Subscribe if you believe no elder should be erased inside their own family. My name is Marjorie. I'm 72 years old, a grandmother to a bright little boy, and a woman who once built a life, only to be pushed out of it like an unwanted guest. I'm not someone who speaks up easily, but this time, I need you to hear me. Not for my sake, but so you don't miss the quiet signs in your own life. This isn't a story that starts with a dramatic explosion. It started with a morning in late October, when I stood in my old kitchen, reached for a spoon, and realized I no longer knew where anything belonged, not even me. It used to be my kitchen. Now, even my coffee mug had been replaced. The cabinet where I once kept my tea tins was now lined with protein powders and toddler vitamins. The faded ceramic mug with the chip on the rim, hand-painted by Eli when he was barely 3, was nowhere to be found. In its place, a minimalist white set that matched the backsplash Whitney insisted on updating for resale value. And I stood barefoot on the cool tile, the morning light slicing through the half-shut blinds. It filtered in like judgment. I didn't recognize the counters anymore. They used to be a little cluttered, a little lived in. Grant and I would bake his favorite oatmeal cookies there when he was a boy, spreading flour like confetti. Now, there was no room for crumbs. I remember when Grant asked me to move in so he could keep an eye on me. I didn't expect the eye would belong to his wife. Whitney had a way of smiling with her teeth, but not her eyes. When she offered me that guest room, my old sewing room, once filled with spools of thread and a rocking chair, I believed it was temporary. Just until I got my energy back. Just until I figured out what I really needed. I didn't think I was signing up for supervised breathing. I reached for the coffee pot, only to find it empty. "Oh," Whitney said from behind me, already buttering toast with surgical precision. "Did you want coffee? I thought you didn't like it strong." I glanced at the machine. Still warm, still fragrant. "I do," I said softly. "I always have." She didn't respond, just handed Grant his travel mug and kissed him on the cheek. He chuckled like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't just watched his mother dismissed from her own mourning. "You headed to the Gazette today, Mom?" he asked, cheerful. I nodded. I went there once a week to read the local paper, the actual print edition, and talk with Mrs. Grady about nothing in particular. That small-town nothing had started to mean everything. Eli appeared then, thumping down the stairs with that half-hopping toddler rhythm. "Grandma!" His voice softened me. He always did. I crouched down, catching him mid-sprint. "Your room still smells like vanilla," he whispered into my ear. I smiled. He still called it my room, even though the new sign on the door said guest suite. Whitney's idea, no doubt. Later that night, long after dinner, after the clink of forks and the silences between, I sat on the edge of the bed that used to be in our master room upstairs. That bed was long gone now, sold when Grant moved in to make the place their own. They kept some of my books, mostly for decor, the ones with the most vintage-looking spines. The hallway creaked, a sound I used to know so well. And then Eli appeared, barefoot and holding his stuffed bear by the ear. "Grandma," he whispered, crawling beside me. "I miss your room." I brushed his hair back from his forehead. "I miss it too, sweetheart." He fell asleep against my arm, the way Grant used to when he was that age. The same warm weight, the same faint baby shampoo smell. I laid him down gently after he drifted off and kissed his cheek. Then I heard Whitney. She was on the phone, her voice just loud enough to slice through the air vents. "I've tolerated that woman long enough," she said. "She disgusts me." There was a pause. "No, of course Grant doesn't see it. He thinks she's harmless, but she's in the way. She makes this house feel old." I didn't move. Not for a full minute. They don't see me anymore. Not even as a person, just an obligation. The next morning, I left early. I needed the sound of other voices, genuine ones, not laced with performance. The farmer's market sat at the end of Maple Lane, about a 10-minute walk from the house I once called mine. I used to drive there with Harold every Saturday before he passed. We'd bicker about the best apple varieties like it was life or death. He always went for Granny Smith's. I favored the Galas. Mrs. Grady waved at me from her booth, her arms full of wildflower bouquets and opinions. "Marjorie," she said, drawing out the syllables like a hymn. "I swear the mums get smaller every year and the prices get higher." I smiled. "Everything does." She leaned closer. "How's Whitney? Still running the house like a Fortune 500 company?" "She's organized," I said, choosing a neutral truth. Mrs. Grady raised an eyebrow but didn't press. She never did. That was her kindness. She just stood there with me a while, letting the morning unfold with the soft creak of old benches and children chasing one another between apple crates. I walked home slower than usual, passing the bakery where Grant once bought me cinnamon rolls after his high school football games. The woman behind the counter didn't recognize me anymore, but the smell, sugar and dough and memory still did. When I got back, Whitney had rearranged the living room. "I figured it would flow better this way," she said, already lighting one of those candles that smells like eucalyptus and sterile dreams. The feng shui was off. She hadn't even looked at me when she said it. The sofa where Harold once read the Sunday paper had been moved near the window. The Afghan I crocheted 5 winters ago was nowhere in sight. I didn't ask where it went. I didn't want to know. That evening, I cooked dinner. Or tried to. Whitney entered the kitchen midway through my chicken pot pie prep, clicked her tongue and said, "Oh, Marjorie, we don't really eat that kind of food anymore. Too heavy." "It's Eli's favorite," I replied. "He'll eat anything if you tell him it's made with love." I almost laughed, but the silence felt heavier. She took over then, reached past me, added her almond milk and pre-cut vegetables, and seasoned with the precision of someone performing for a food blog. I just stepped back, watched her hands undo my recipe. Later that night, I stood outside on the back porch. The wind carried a chill now. October was folding into November, the trees surrendering one leaf at a time. The porch light buzzed with age, like it might give out at any second. I pulled Harold's cardigan tighter around me. That's when I realized I hadn't heard my own voice in hours. Not really. I'd spoken, yes. Pleasantries, filler words, but not a single sentence that mattered. When I came back inside, Eli was already asleep. Grant was in the den watching a game. Whitney was at the kitchen island, laptop open, AirPods in. And me? I stood at the stairwell, where once we used to hang holiday garlands and handwritten school projects. I stared at the wall, at the space where Harold's photo had been replaced by some abstract print Whitney probably found online. I wasn't angry. That was the strange part. I wasn't burning with rage or betrayal. I wasn't even sad. Just empty. They don't see me anymore. Not even as a person. Just an obligation. I went upstairs, packed slowly, only what I could carry. A few old photos, the cardigan, 2 books with my name written in faded ink, and Eli's drawing of me, crayon lines crooked and proud. I didn't leave a note. Didn't want to. I walked out just after midnight. The moon was sharp, the street silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves and Mrs. Grady's wind chime across the road. My hand trembled slightly as I reached the gate. This house, the one we built, laughed in, mourned in. It no longer knew me, and maybe I no longer needed it to. "I think it's time I left my own house," I whispered. And I did, with only 2 bags and no plan. Freedom smelled like old carpet and microwave dinners, but it was mine. The first night in the apartment, I couldn't sleep, not from fear or regret, but from the strange quiet. No footsteps overhead, no passive-aggressive dishwasher slams, no Eli's soft voice behind the door, asking if I wanted to read another book. Just the buzz of the mini fridge and the distant hum of Willow Creek traffic. The floor creaked beneath me when I walked barefoot to the tiny kitchenette. There were only 2 cabinets, both crooked. A stove that hissed before it lit. The coffee pot was secondhand, probably a relic from someone's college dorm, but it gurgled just fine the next morning. I poured the coffee into my chipped mug, the one with the faded cardinal on it, and stood by the only window. Below me, the diner's awning fluttered like tired laundry in the wind. Closed until further notice. That sign had hung there since the pandemic started. No one had bothered to take it down. I liked that about the place. It didn't pretend. Back in 1994, my husband and I signed the deed to that house. Now I signed a lease to a 1-bedroom above a closed-down diner. The irony didn't sting. It felt honest, like life had come full circle and dropped me here with exactly what I needed: a bed, a working kettle, and 4 walls that didn't whisper judgment. Mrs. Grady showed up on day 2. She didn't knock first, just barged in holding a Tupperware of beef stew and 2 crusty rolls wrapped in foil. "I saw your light. Figured you hadn't stocked the pantry yet," she said, eyes already scanning the apartment. "It's not much," I said. "It's yours," she corrected, placing the food on the wobbly table. That's more than most people can say. We sat across from each other, 2 women used to reading between the lines. She didn't ask why I left, didn't mention Whitney or Grant. Instead, she told me about her cat's new habit of sleeping in the laundry basket and the city council's fight over the Christmas lights budget. "Everyone's up in arms about using LED," she said, dunking bread into her stew. "Apparently, tradition dies when the electric bill rises." I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. That afternoon, I walked to the farmer's market. Same stalls, same cracked sidewalk, same woman selling honey from bees she named like grandchildren. But this time, I wasn't Marjorie Grant's mother. I was just Marjorie. And people spoke to me like that mattered. "Back for your gala apples?" the vendor asked with a wink. "Every time," I smiled, taking the bag from him. I wandered a while, bought a jar of raspberry jam, a crossword book, and a little plastic bird feeder shaped like a barn. It reminded me of Harold. He once said birds were the only creatures that understood how to leave and come back without guilt. By the time I got home, the apartment felt less temporary. I brewed tea, sat by the window, and watched the shadows stretch long across the street. Somewhere, wind chimes danced. I fed the birds, filled in 3 crossword clues, and let the radio hum soft jazz through my little corner of peace. The next envelope came 3 days later. It was from the credit union, where Harold and I once held a joint account. I'd forgotten we still had one open, a small savings we kept for emergencies. After he passed, I never closed it. Maybe part of me didn't want to admit I was the only one left to manage anything. The balance was lower than I remembered. Not drastically, just thinner, as if someone had been taking teaspoons from a full bowl, hoping no one would notice until it echoed at the bottom. I frowned, checked the dates. The withdrawals were recent, small, consistent, round numbers, not the kind that came from groceries or gas. I remembered Grant mentioning something over dinner last spring, something about a business expansion, but he'd brushed past the details like they weren't meant for me. I made a note to ask him, not accuse, just ask. But part of me already knew the answer. Mrs. Grady showed up again 2 mornings later, this time with banana bread and a stack of coupons she insisted I'd need for the winter grocery surge. "You look lighter," she said while I made us both tea. "Lighter? Like someone took a weight off your back. Or maybe off your chest." I didn't answer right away, just stirred a little honey into her cup and slid it toward her. It's strange. I still wake up thinking I need to check the thermostat for Eli's room. "Habit," she said, sipping. "Takes time to break." We sat in silence, not needing to fill it. Outside, the wind pushed leaves against the windows like they were knocking to come in. Inside, the apartment smelled of cinnamon and old wallpaper. Later that afternoon, the mail came. In the pile, an envelope with childish handwriting and too many stickers. Inside was a drawing, crayons on lined notebook paper, bright blue walls, a bed, and a stick figure with white hair and big eyes. The words said, "Grandma's new house," in orange marker. Next to it, a heart. I sat down hard on the kitchen chair, pressed the paper to my chest. Eli. No return address, of course. Whitney wouldn't allow that. Probably didn't even know he'd sent it. But his tiny fingerprints were all over it. A quiet rebellion made of crayon and hope. That night, I called Grant. "Thanks for letting Eli write me," I said. There was a pause. "He did?" My heart twisted. "I got a drawing. Grandma's new house." He remembered. Grant exhaled. "Whitney's been stressed. She might have tossed it if she saw. I'll make sure he can keep writing. He misses you." I didn't answer that. I wasn't sure if I could without sounding like my throat was breaking. Instead, I shifted. "I got a bank notice," I said. "From the old joint account. Withdrawals." Another pause. Longer. "I didn't think that account was still open," he said carefully. "It is." "I'm sure it's nothing. Whitney probably used it for groceries. She's been managing most of the bills since I've been focused on the project." "What project?" He hesitated. "You know, the franchise plan. We were going to expand the cafe, add a location near Lancaster." "Right," I said quietly. "And how's that going?" "Well, it's been delayed. Permits, costs, you know how it is." I did know how it was. I'd run our house on one income when Harold got laid off in '89. I knew exactly how it was. And I also knew when someone was dancing around the numbers. "Are you checking the books, son?" "What?" "The numbers. Are you looking at them yourself?" There was a defensive laugh. "Whitney handles that. She's good with numbers." "So was Enron," I said, before I could stop myself. The silence on the line wasn't angry, just tired. "Mom," he sighed, "don't do this. Don't start seeing ghosts in the shadows." "I'm not," I replied gently. but I know what it looks like when someone's building a fence and hiding the receipts. We didn't say much else. I told him I loved him. He told me the same. Neither of us believed the words fully, but we said them anyway, out of habit. After I hung up, I sat by the window again. The streetlight flickered below, catching the glass door of the diner like a signal. Everything felt a little tilted, like the floor had shifted beneath me, and I was the only one who noticed. I pulled out my address book. Most of the names were crossed out, moved away, passed on, lost touch. But one stood out. Stanley Halpern, Harold's old friend, a retired attorney who now spent most of his time restoring model trains and reading spy novels. He'd once helped us settle a dispute with a construction company that tried to overcharge on repairs. I dialed. He picked up on the third ring. "Marjorie, I haven't heard that voice since your Harold's wake. How are you, darling?" "Better now," I said truthfully. "You still know people?" "People? Quiet people, who don't ask too many questions but find answers." He chuckled. "I might." I glanced at the bank statement again, then at the crayon drawing taped to the wall near the sink. If I were to investigate something, hypothetically, would you know someone discreet? He looked me in the eye and said, "Don't meddle, Mom." But when a mother stops meddling, she stops caring. That morning, the sky hung low like a warning, the kind of pale gray that promised rain, not yet falling, but waiting. The town was already dressed for Thanksgiving, fake pumpkins on porch steps, cinnamon candles burning in store windows. Everyone was pretending we were all still thankful. I met Connie at the public library cafe. She looked like someone's niece. Corduroy jacket, no makeup, hair pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days. She carried a laptop, a manila folder, and a pair of eyes that missed nothing. "I'm sorry it's not better news," she said, flipping open the folder. I didn't answer. I didn't blink. She turned the screen toward me. The video was grainy but clear enough. Whitney, in a tan coat I'd seen her wear last month, stepping out of a building I recognized. Grant's office. Right behind her, Derek. He touched her back first, then her cheek, then her lips. It wasn't quick, wasn't heat of the moment. It was practiced, familiar. "I also pulled the financials," Connie added quietly. "These transfers go back 9 months, small amounts, all from the business account, into what looks like a shell consultancy registered under Derek's name, but Whitney listed as an advisor." "How much?" I asked, my voice more gravel than breath. "Over 30 grand. That's just what we traced." The folder had copies of the account details, names, fake invoices. Nothing dramatic, just quiet, cold theft in digital ink. I leaned back. The chair creaked under me. "I should have seen it," I said, mostly to myself. Connie closed the folder. "You did. That's why you hired me." It was strange. The pain didn't arrive the way I expected. No sharp stab, no breaking glass, just a dull echo that spread across my ribs like a bruise. When I got home, Eli's latest drawing was waiting in my mailbox. 2 houses. One was labeled Grandma's, with a smiling stick figure and a tree with red apples. The other said, Mom and Uncle Derek, drawn with 2 people hugging and a tiny dog that didn't exist. I traced the crayon lines with my finger. He knew. He didn't have the words for it, but he felt it. Children always do. They see the silences grown-ups try to paint over. I called Grant. "Come by," I said. "Just you, please." He arrived after sundown, wore that navy pea coat I'd bought him for his first job interview. He still let Whitney iron the collar too flat. I poured him coffee, the real kind, not Whitney's almond water brew. Set the folder on the table between us. "Look through it," I said. "Before you say anything, Just look. He flipped the first few pages, skimmed faster with each one. Where'd you get this? He asked, DIL, voice tightening. A friend? Jesus, Mom. Don't take the Lord's name to defend a liar. You had me followed? No, I said gently. I had her followed because I still love you. He stood up, pushed the folder away like it might burn him. I can't believe this. You always hated her. I hoped I was wrong, I said. I prayed I was wrong. The front door opened without knocking. She walked in like a final act. Red eyes, wet tissue, voice already trembling. She's trying to break us apart, Whitney cried. She hates me so much. She'd rather poison you than let us be happy. Grant turned to her, caught between fury and fear. She hired a private investigator, he told her. She had you watched. Whitney collapsed into his arms like a soap opera heroine. Why would she do this to me? I stood there, not screaming, not sobbing, just watching my son choose a stranger over his own blood. I didn't argue. What would have been the point? Whitney had tears. Grant had guilt. And I, apparently, had neither place nor voice in the life I helped build from scratch. I stepped toward the coat rack, slowly, without theatrics. I think you should leave, Grant said, his tone lower now. Less angry, more tired. I already did, I replied. You just didn't notice. I picked up my coat, buttoned it from the bottom like my husband used to tell me. Start low, stay steady. It was his way of saying, don't panic, just finish. Whitney didn't look at me. She stayed curled in Grant's chest like a wounded bird that always somehow had sharp claws. Outside, the air was sharp with frost. Lights flickered on along Main Street. A boy rode past on a bike too big for him, the wheels squeaking in protest. Somewhere nearby, someone burned firewood. It smelled like comfort I couldn't afford tonight. At the apartment, I didn't cry. I reheated soup from Mrs. Grady and watched an old game show rerun with the volume low. The quiet gave me space to breathe, but also made the edges of pain clearer. There were no distractions to blame. Later, I sat at the foot of my bed, the one I made each morning even though no one else saw it. I reached into the closet and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were photographs, warranty papers, some old Valentine cards with faded ink, and a folder with legal tabs I had labeled back in 1994. The deed. Grant and I had added his name when he got married, yes, but I never took mine off. I held the document up to the light, checking every line. There it was, my name, first owner, still legally tied to that address. The house was mine before she ever burned her first casserole in that kitchen, before she replaced my mug, before she turned my son into a roommate, and I had forgotten that power. Funny how you can live decades as a mother, wife, caretaker, and forget that you ever signed something on your own, that you were once enough to put your name on a thing and call it yours. I set the deed down slowly, like setting down a card in a poker game I hadn't realized I was playing. But now I saw the table clearly, and I wasn't folding. She looked at me and hissed, "You've disgusted me since the day I met you." I smiled and pressed play. The house smelled like cinnamon and tension. I arrived early, always did, and brought nothing but a small handbag and something far heavier in my coat pocket. Thanksgiving and Grant's birthday had been lumped into one big dinner this year, probably Whitney's way of proving she could multitask love and domination in a single seating arrangement. The dining room looked like it had stepped out of a catalog. Gold-accented napkins, wine glasses polished to military standards, a turkey that glistened like it had been lacquered. But the table wasn't the only thing perfectly staged. Whitney wore cranberry red silk, hair pulled back like a senator's wife. Her smile had all the authenticity of a wax museum hostess. She walked toward me, arms wide. "So glad you could come," she said. We were worried your little apartment might feel lonely tonight. I didn't answer, just took my seat at the far end of the table, the one where my husband used to carve the turkey while humming jazz under his breath. That chair was now occupied by Grant, head of the table in posture, but not in spine. Mrs. Grady sat 2 chairs away, quietly sipping her wine and observing like a historian. Eli clutched a stuffed bear in one hand, already eyeing the pumpkin pie. Around us, a few cousins from Whitney's side filled space with small talk and compliments about the decor. No one seemed to notice the storm clouds gathering right above the mashed potatoes. Dinner began as planned. Whitney, of course, made a point of announcing, "The stuffing is mine. Secret recipe. No shortcuts." Grant nodded proudly, like she'd cured cancer with breadcrumbs. After the first course, Grant stood to give a speech. It was heartfelt, if rehearsed. He thanked everyone for coming, praised family as the glue of our lives, and said something about gratitude being the light in dark times. I watched him the whole time, wondering if he felt it yet. That shift in the air, like a room where a window's been left open just enough to let something in. After the applause died down, I stood up slowly, lifted my glass of cider. "To the truth," I said, "which always finds its way to the table, even if it comes late." Some eyebrows rose. Whitney's mouth tightened. I sipped, then gently placed the glass down. "Excuse me a moment." I left the dining room and walked down the hall. The same hallway where Harold used to pause each morning to kiss my cheek before heading to the carpool. The same spot where I'd once comforted Grant after his first heartbreak. Funny how a house remembers, even when the people inside it try to forget. In the living room, I opened my bag, took out the laptop Connie had loaned me. I'd already queued up the footage, double-checked the sound. When I came back, the room quieted. I placed the laptop at the head of the table. No words, just a tap of the spacebar. The video played. No one spoke. There she was, Whitney, wearing that tan coat, stepping out of the Radley Inn. Derek beside her. A kiss. A touch. A smile not meant for my son. Then the screenshots. Emails between her and Derek. Jokes about double-dipping the business fund. References to shell accounts. Bank transfers scrolling across the screen like confession. When it ended, I closed the laptop and looked straight at her. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just stared. I reached into my coat, pulled out an envelope, and walked it to her place setting, right between her wine glass and the untouched cranberry sauce. "I suggest you read this somewhere private," I said, voice level. "It's your notice." Then I turned to the rest of the table. "This house is mine." For a moment, no one moved. Even the candles flickered slower, like the air itself had thickened. Whitney stared at the envelope. Her perfectly painted fingers didn't reach for it. Not yet. Grant looked between the two of us like a man in a courtroom who just realized he might be on trial, not the jury. Finally, he spoke. Quiet. Almost scared. "Is it true?" Whitney turned to him, lips parted, but no sound came out. No denial. No outrage. Not even a lie. She blinked. And that was answer enough. Mrs. Grady muttered under her breath, just loud enough for only me to hear. "You held your tongue too long, Marge, but damn if that wasn't worth the wait." The envelope still lay untouched on the table, but the cranberry sauce wasn't so lucky. Whitney's hand flew toward her wine glass. It shattered against the wall behind me before I even flinched. Red drops splattered across the tablecloth, trailing toward the bowl of cranberry like a threat-turned metaphor. "I gave everything to this family," she hissed. "Everything, and you, a dried-up bitter old ghost." Grant didn't defend her, didn't touch her. He just looked down at the table, Then, at the broken stem of the wine glass on the floor. "You should go," he said. Whitney froze. Her chest heaved like she couldn't decide whether to cry or scream again. Then she pushed back her chair so hard it scraped the floor like a scream of its own. She snatched the envelope, tore it open with shaking hands, but didn't read it. She stormed down the hall, heels echoing like thunder in an empty hallway. The front door slammed a second later, and still no one spoke. I turned back toward the table, picked up my napkin, dabbed a small dot of wine from my wrist. "I apologize for the disruption," I said. "Dessert is still in the fridge, if anyone's brave." Someone let out a nervous laugh. Mrs. Grady reached for the pie. The cousins avoided eye contact. Eli was the only one who moved toward me, quietly, slowly. He climbed off his chair and walked over, dragging his bear behind him by one arm. He didn't say much, just reached for my hand and held it tightly in both of his. Then he looked up with those round, soft eyes, the same color as his father's. "Grandma," he whispered, "can I sleep over at your house now?" The silence after truth is louder than a lie ever was. The house was quiet, in a way it hadn't been since Grant was a boy. Not peaceful, just empty. You know, the kind of silence that hums through the floorboards, that settles in your bones like a cold draft you can't quite locate. That was the kind we had now. Whitney left with just one suitcase. Funny, she had arrived with so much noise. Opinions about curtain colors, better ways to arrange the pantry, strong perfume that lingered for hours after she left a room. All that was gone now. Only a faint dent in the couch where she used to sit with crossed legs and sharpened tone. I came back that morning to check on Grant. I didn't knock. He was in the living room, slouched on the edge of the couch, holding a shattered photo frame. It was the one from their wedding. I noticed the glass had cracked right through Whitney's face. Whether by accident or intention, I didn't ask. He didn't look up when I entered. "Coffee?" I asked gently. He shook his head. I sat across from him, the silence stretching like unspoken grief. "She ran everything," he finally said. "Not just the books, me. I didn't even see it until all of it." I waited. Let the words fall where they may. "She made me feel like I needed permission to breathe." His voice cracked, but the tears didn't come. Not yet. That would take time. He wasn't raised to cry. That was the problem. The room smelled faintly of cinnamon, Whitney's old candle, the one she lit not for comfort but control. Eli came by that afternoon, cradling a drawing in both hands like it was gold leaf. He ran straight to me, arms wrapping around my waist. "I drew something," he said proudly. He held it up. A tall tree with bright pink flowers, roots that curled like fingers, and a tiny house beneath it. "That's Grandma's tree," he said. "It grows even in the snow." I knelt beside him. "Does it now?" He nodded. "Because it remembers." Out of the mouths of children. I pinned it to the fridge when we returned to my place. It stayed there, right above my old notepad, the one I still used for groceries and scribbled thoughts when sleep wouldn't come. That evening, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Holloway?" The woman asked it. "Yes?" "This is Tina, Derek's ex. I heard what happened. I just wanted to say thank you." Her voice was tight, as if she was afraid she'd be punished just for reaching out. "They did this before," she added. "Not just to your son. Whitney's clever. Derek's a coward." "I'm sorry you went through it," I said. "I'm just glad someone finally said it out loud." So was I. A knock came not long after. Mrs. Grady, with her ever-reliable timing, stood at the door with a jar of lemon ginger tea concentrate and a plastic bag full of ginger cookies. You looked tired yesterday, she said, as if that was explanation enough. She followed me in and set the jar on the counter. You know, she added, Harold once fixed that rail with nothing but a screwdriver and a butter knife. Wouldn't even let the handyman touch it. Said it was his house. And he'd be damned if anyone else got the final say. I smiled, not a wide one, but honest. He built more than the rail, I said. Mrs. Grady patted my shoulder. He built you a fortress. Took a while, but you finally remembered how to stand inside it. Later that night, after Eli fell asleep with graham cracker crumbs on his pajama shirt, I walked into the study. The light had a yellow glow, the kind that made paper look older than it was. There was a box I hadn't touched in years. I didn't even know why I opened it, only that my hands moved without asking permission. Inside were letters, receipts from vacations we couldn't really afford back then, a grocery list written on the back of a church bulletin, and an old spiral notebook, blue cover, corners bent, my husband's handwriting scrawled in sharp, stubborn loops. I turned the pages. Notes from when we planned to repaint the bedroom, a sketch of the back porch railing. Then, on the third page from the end, a line I had never noticed before. If you ever feel small in this house, it read, remember, I built it for you. That's when I sat down, not because my legs gave out, but because my heart did. I remembered him on Sunday mornings, humming in the kitchen while frying bacon, the way he always knocked, even when the door was wide open, just to make me smile. And I thought of how much space I had given up over the years, how I had folded myself smaller and smaller until I fit neatly between someone else's comfort zones. But that line, that was a doorway, and I was stepping through it. The next morning, I returned to the old house, not to argue, not to forgive, just to see. Grant was in the backyard, raking leaves into careful piles that the wind kept undoing. He looked up when I approached, eyes puffy, shoulders drawn tight like a coat that no longer fit right. I didn't expect you, he said. I didn't expect you either, I replied. He dropped the rake and leaned on it. I keep thinking about everything I didn't see, about how I let her, how I let all of it happen. You didn't let it happen, I said softly. You just never looked hard enough. He nodded. That's what hurts. I didn't say anything. We stood there, watching a squirrel dart between trees like it had important errands to run. The air smelled like dust, cinnamon, and regret. Then he looked at me, really looked, like he was trying to remember something about me he'd long forgotten. Mom, his voice cracked just enough to sting. Can I move back in, just for a while? I waited, let the silence stretch, like an old sweater pulled between hands. Then I said, steady and clear, you can visit, but this time, you'll knock. The next few days passed in slow motion. I started noticing things I hadn't before, like how the floor creaked differently depending on where you stepped. Grant always walked heavy, like he was trying to prove something. Eli skipped, even when he was trying to be sneaky. The way the morning sun fell across the hallway now, it used to shine straight into my husband's face while he read the paper. He never moved out of its path, said it woke him up better than coffee. The house was full of echoes, not loud ones, just the kind that sneak up in the middle of making toast or folding towels. I found one in the drawer where we kept old batteries, another inside a casserole dish I hadn't used since Easter of '06. Eli came by again that Friday. He didn't ask for Whitney, didn't even say her name. He just wanted apples and to watch cartoons from the 90s, the kind with grainy music and flat colors. I made popcorn and sat with him, both of us saying nothing for a full episode. At one point, he rested his head on my arm and whispered, "It feels better here." "Then where?" He shrugged. "Just better." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, looking through bills and grocery lists. Nothing special, but the quiet was comfortable now, not empty, just uncluttered. Like space was finally being made for something else. I lit a candle that smelled like cedar and cinnamon, not because anyone expected it, but because I liked the way it reminded me of December mornings with my husband. He'd make French toast, burn one side, laugh like it was a secret between us. I wrote his name in my notebook, slow and small. Then, underneath, I added my own. Not beside it, not below it, just mine, on its own line, for the first time in years. It was snowing the day Eli called it Grandma's house again, and for once it felt true. The flakes had started gently, brushing against the windows like a polite knock. The kind of snow that didn't demand attention. It just arrived, soft and certain, blanketing the corners of the world that needed quieting. Eli was already at the kitchen table, crayons spread out like a burst of confetti, tongue between his teeth as he concentrated on drawing a snowman with boots. His cheeks were red from the cold, and his socks didn't match. "This one's for the fridge," he declared, holding it up. I smiled. "You think he'll fit with all your other masterpieces?" He gave me a look, half serious, half smug. "He's special. He's got your scarf." I leaned over and ruffled his hair. Then up he goes. The kitchen smelled of cocoa and cinnamon. The mug in my hand was chipped on the rim, the way I liked it. It had weight, memory, unlike the ones Whitney had bought, thin and glassy, meant to impress rather than comfort. Grant arrived around noon with a bag of salt for the walkway and a loaf of bread he claimed he'd baked. I didn't ask questions. I just thanked him. He didn't say much, but he salted the steps, shoveled the drive, and stayed long enough to fix the loose gutter without being asked. Small acts, small repairs. That's how bridges get built again. Later, while Eli napped under the same quilt my mother stitched back in '68, I sat by the window with a letter in my lap. The envelope was pink, a little creased, from Tina. "Dear Marjorie," it began, "you have no idea how many women you stood up for without even knowing it." She told me about the years Derek had made her feel invisible, how Whitney had twisted truths, manipulated their social circle, and siphoned money from accounts she didn't even know existed. "But you," she wrote, "you stood up when most of us would have swallowed the hurt." I folded the letter slowly, held it to my chest, not out of pride, out of recognition of all the women who sit quietly, bearing weight they didn't ask to carry, hoping for someone to notice before they disappear. Mrs. Grady came by in the afternoon with a tin of sugar cookies and a folder under her arm. "I figured you should have this," she said, placing it gently on the counter. It was a photocopy of the original deed. My husband and I, side by side, signatures neat and hopeful. She had been the witness back then. "I always thought that house had your fingerprints more than anyone else's," she added. "Even now, it smells like you." We laughed, quietly, the kind that sits in your belly for a while, warming you better than cocoa. When the sun began to dip behind the rooftops, Eli and I bundled up in layers and stepped into the yard. The apple tree looked like a strange sculpture, bare, reaching, but dotted with red circles, hand-painted ornaments, each one different, most wobbly. He ran ahead, tying one more to the lowest branch. "Now it's done," he declared. "Our tree." "Our tree?" I asked, étonnante. He nodded. "At Grandma's house." And something inside me, something soft but stubborn, settled into place, like it had been waiting for permission. That night, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. I hadn't touched it in years, not since he passed. It still smelled like pine and faint tobacco, a scent that clung to his flannel shirts even after 3 wash cycles. I pulled out the old photo albums, yellowed corners curling like tired hands. The house looked different in those pictures. Brighter, maybe. Younger. There was one of Grant as a boy, holding up a frog with both hands like a trophy. My husband was in the background, laughing, mid-step, coming down that same stairwell where everything had changed, and then changed again. I ran my fingers along the edge of the photo, tracing lines that didn't exist on paper but did in memory. The fireplace crackled downstairs. Eli had fallen asleep on the couch with one sock half off, his head resting on the armrest like he owned it. Grant had stayed a little longer that evening, chopping firewood with more effort than technique. His hands were blistered. He didn't complain. "Want some hot cocoa?" he'd asked me earlier, holding up the wrong kind of mug. "Not that one," I said gently. "The heavy ones. Back left cabinet." He'd nodded, didn't push, just learned. Later, I lit a candle and walked down to the stairwell, the same spot where I had once stood, holding eviction papers, where I'd heard Whitney call me disgusting, where I'd watched the end of something that had taken a lifetime to build. And yet, it was also where I'd once been kissed goodbye every morning by a man who built this house with his hands, who saved receipts in alphabetical order and taught Grant how to patch drywall and fold a fitted sheet. I placed the candle at the base of the rail and sat on the third step, the one that creaked. "I'm back," I whispered. "It's mine again, love. And I'm not invisible anymore." The flame flickered once, then held steady. Outside, the wind played with the lights Eli had strung along the porch railing, uneven, slightly crooked, perfect. I heard a rustle from the couch, small feet padding toward the kitchen. "Grandma?" Eli yawned. I met him in the hallway, lifting him into my arms like I'd done when he was a baby. He was heavier now, but I didn't mind. He rested his head on my shoulder. "Grandma, can we make this our tradition every year?" I smiled into his hair, warm and messy. "Only if you bring the marshmallows." A week after Christmas, I found myself humming in the kitchen. Not loudly, not for anyone else, just for me. The snow had melted a little around the edges, leaving slush by the steps and dark streaks on the sidewalk. Inside, the floors creaked with memory. Every time I passed the hallway mirror, I saw a woman standing straighter. Grant still came by. He never stayed long, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with nothing but silence and the weight of wanting to help. He didn't say sorry again. He didn't need to. His hands did enough, fixing a crooked cabinet door, unclogging the sink, helping Eli tie his boots. We didn't talk about Whitney anymore. There was nothing left to say. The silence wasn't bitter. It was restful, like a room that had been aired out after too many years shut tight. Mrs. Grady had started a knitting circle on Thursdays. She dragged me to the first one. I stayed for the next 3 on my own. I wasn't very good. My scarf looked like it had opinions. But the company was warm, and the tea was hot. And for the first time in a long time, I was just Marjorie. Not someone's burden. Not a ghost in her own house. One afternoon, I walked with Eli to the park. The benches were cold, and the slide had a sheen of frost. But he didn't mind. He ran ahead with a stick, pretending it was a magic wand. I watched him from a distance, one mittened hand waving back at me now and then. Another woman might have regretted not stepping in sooner, might have wished she'd fought back earlier, spoken louder, demanded more. But I don't carry regret like that anymore. What I carry now is presence. This moment, this house, this boy laughing in a park. In the evenings, when the house settled and the fire dimmed, I'd sometimes talk to my husband again. Not out loud, not exactly. But I'd open his old notebook, feel the grooves where his pen pressed deep, and imagine what he'd say if he were here. "Not bad, Marge," I could almost hear. "Took you long enough. And maybe he'd be right. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving again. It's strange, really, how quiet the world becomes when you're no longer trying to be heard. I spent so many years speaking softly, not because I lacked the words, but because I thought love meant shrinking myself to make others more comfortable. I let holidays pass in someone else's house, watched my name get written out of traditions I once created, and told myself it was enough just to be present, even if I wasn't seen. But presence isn't the same as belonging. I used to believe that being a mother, a wife, a grandmother meant always giving, that my worth was measured by how well I held others up, even if it broke my back to do so. I thought endurance was virtue, but now I know. Boundaries are love too, especially when they start with yourself. Leaving wasn't easy. It never is. Not when the people you're walking away from are the same ones you once rocked to sleep. But staying would have meant disappearing entirely. So I packed my bags, not with anger, but with the quiet kind of hope that comes from remembering who you used to be. And here's the truth I've learned. People don't always mean to take you for granted. Sometimes, they're just too used to your silence, too comfortable with your sacrifices. Sometimes they need to see what life feels like without you holding up the walls, just to remember why they stood so strong in the first place. I don't need a parade. I don't need an apology scrawled in big words or tied up in a ribbon. What I needed, and found, was space to breathe again. A room where the coffee tastes like I like it, where the walls remember my laughter. A house that knew my name again. Now, my grandson curls up on my couch and asks for stories. My son knocks before entering. And me? I smile more often. I sleep better. I even started writing again. Not because life is perfect. It isn't. But because I finally remembered I deserve peace too. So, if you're listening to this, and you've ever felt invisible in your own story, maybe it's time to turn the page. Maybe love isn't about giving until you're empty. Maybe it's about giving from a place that never asks you to disappear. I didn't take my life back with noise or revenge. I took it back by coming home to myself. And that, to me, is the quietest kind of revolution.